Welcome, everyone. And I'm Jeremy Lent, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's live interactive conversation here on the Deep Transformation Network with Ursula Goodenough and Andreas Weber. And this session is called Shifting Paradigms, How Biology Reveals the Sacred Quality of Life. And this is actually one of my personal all-time favorite topics. And for me, there's a real powerful personal resonance in today's conversation. Because nearly 20 years ago now, I began like a multi-year research project that led to my two books, The Patterning Instinct and The Web of Meaning. And as I began that research, I started to dip into mainstream narratives of what life is all around. I initially came across the familiar names like Richard Dawkins and others like that, telling me basically, well, I'm just a machine dominated by my selfish genes. That's just the way it is. But one of the earliest books I was lucky enough to come across was The Sacred Depths of Nature by Ursula Goodenough, which helped to point me in a direction that I've been just grateful to pursue ever since, this sense that it's possible to embrace both scientific rigor and a deeply spiritual realization of the universe as an integrated whole. And then as the years went on, I came across the mind-blowing philosophical explorations of Andreas Weber, which helped me foundationally to frame my own sense-making about the world that I formulated in The Web of Meaning. So it gives me great personal delight that we, in this conversation today, will be with Ursula and Andreas. Welcome here, two pioneering biologist visionaries. And just a couple of words about how the session is going to work. The event lasts 75 minutes. We're going to start off with a three-way conversation with the three of us. And after about half an hour, we'll open up the floor to questions from all of you, from any of you who want to ask. So when the time comes, please be ready to go to the Zoom like reactions and then hands up. Click there and ask your question directly. But if you do feel a bit shy and you have a question, but you'd rather just write it in the chat, that's fine. And some of our team here will be trying to catch those and funnel them to me so we can incorporate them in the session too. So just by way of a brief introduction here now to Ursula and Andreas. Ursula is a renowned cell biologist and co-founder of the Religious Naturalist Association, which I've been a member of for many years. And she's author, of course, of the best-selling classic, The Sacred Depths of Nature, which is soon going to be published, by the way, by Oxford University Press in a revised edition. So look out for that. And she's participated in seminars on Western science for the Dalai Lama, among many others. And she's also a fellow of the prestigious American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And I'm delighted to say that she also hosts the Religious Naturalist Orientation Group here on the Deep Transformation Network. I've been so thrilled. So many people have enjoyed connecting with you on that, Ursula. And Andreas is a Berlin-based, internationally renowned philosopher of biology who collaborated earlier in his career with the legendary Francisco Varela, who many of you will know of. And Andreas has written a series of profound books exploring a new way of understanding life. And the titles of his books are really enough to give you a feeling for what they offer. There's The Biology of Wonder, Aliveness, Feeling, and the Metamorphosis of Science. And then there's Matter and Desire, an Erotic Ecology. And then there's the Enlivenment Manifesto towards a Poetics for the Anthropocene, which proposes like a whole new paradigm for seeing nature as a living commons. So Andreas teaches at two different universities and he contributes to major German magazines and journals. And I'm just thrilled to have you both here. So welcome, Ursula and Andreas. And to start out with, what I'd really love to ask, I've been curious about this for both of you. You both began as biologists in the mainstream reductionist tradition. And I'm so curious, how did your own personal trajectory, either in research or your own life experience, lead you from that sort of mainstream approach to biology to this exploration of the more spiritual dimensions that we're here to talk about today. Perhaps I can turn to you, Ursula, and you can just share.
Well, I never really left. I remained a reductionist bench scientist the whole time. So, and I don't personally feel that that's a pejorative way of doing science. It's just a way of doing science, and it's a way of doing science that sort of tells us what's going on, what to put in the movie, and then you watch the movie, and then you try to figure out how it works and how it happened and what's going on and who's interacting with whom and everything. But to reduce for me is part of the fun. But anyway, I was doing that and continue to, but got interested in the religious, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, manifestations of these understandings in the late 90s, and wrote my book. And many of my colleagues told me I'd never get another grant because
I was wondering that, yeah.
But I continue to be funded just fine. And a lot of scientists have been very, very positive about it. So I just sort of took off in two directions.
That's great. So it hasn't felt to you then like this break, or you haven't been critiqued or found your career was sort of jeopardized or whatever by this exploration of the spiritual arising from it. That's great to hear. That's yeah.
There's this perception that scientists are all like, the four horsemen, and they're all, reductionist, and which you intimated a little bit in your intro, and that stuff is really not all that mainstream anymore, at least among the scientists that I hang out with. I mean, everybody's understanding that there are systems, and that there are emergent properties, and that there are dynamics and feelings, and all that stuff is not a big heresy in. Maybe I just know nice scientists, but
that's interesting. That's great to hear that.
We're all on the same page, and many cheering my book and stuff. So I think that scientists, although we will never tell you that we think reductionism is a bad idea, that's not. We understand that reductionism isn't the point.
Well, that is super to hear, Ursula. And how about you, Andreas? What was your path, and what was your experience? Did you have similar experience, or was it different in that regard?
Well, it was for sure slightly different, pretty different probably. But I also started out in a different way, and I came to biology actually out of a sort of desperation about the humanities, which I started to be a humanities student. And I found the doctrine of arbitrariness, of being detached from experience as something real, so frightening. I wouldn't have dared to say wrong, because there were all these authorities. The heyday of Paris semiology, and the idea that there is no nature because all is human projection, and there's only language. So I then tried to be a refugee in biology, only to see that there was the other mob telling me that, again, there is no subjective experience. And I actually came to all this because I always had this profound feeling of joy in the presence of all living beings. Or maybe I should say I somehow was always very aware that to be alive is an experience full of bliss, or of eudaimonia would be how the Greek philosophers would say. And I wanted to understand that. And there was actually no real space. And if I go that far, there is still not a real space in scientific biology, although we're coming closer, but it's still relatively radical to say, okay, let's understand why living beings experience the world as a meaningful inside, how can that happen? Because that's the most important thing. Yeah, so I led a very much rebel life somehow. Still do, probably.
Right. I hear you. Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear that contrast in experiences there. And yeah, I'm curious about that, especially, Ursula, your path, which seems to have been a lot more harmonious than many I've come across. I mean, and like speaking personally, I once, for example, wrote an article in an online journal critiquing Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene. And I got bombarded by literally thousands of, it was like about the only time in my life I've been sort of trolled, like thousands of things like this imbecile, this, he's complete, like this really almost like this fundamentalist kind of sense I got from people who, just feel that the world needs to be explained by the selfish gene, or that we are nothing but this, or nothing but ourselves, or nothing but. Of course, Richard Dawkins is one of these people who has influenced this sort of common way of understanding evolution. And there's still, I think, in the main dominant understanding, this kind of view, this sort of metaphor of nature as a machine, which you see really cropping up in not just in sort of cultural stuff, but in scientific journals, articles that I've read. And one thing I'm curious about, like if I'm a reductionist, and let me turn to you, Ursula, and just say, and I'm saying that actually, we are nothing but ultimately our quarks or our elements or our genes or whatever. How would you explain the sort of stepping stones, if you will, that leads from that sort of mechanistic view? And, there's this big part of our paradigm in the dominant worldview that science has got nothing to do with spirituality, nothing to do with quality, but it's an objective explanation of the facts that are out there. So how would you sort of take people from that place to this place of religious naturalism?
Let's get science defined, at least the way I would. Right. Science is a method. It's a method of inquiry, and it produces understandings of nature that then lead to technologies. So we have sort of an independent test that a lot of them are really holding up. So that's natural science. There's also social science. It's a way of asking, but a lot of times people use science as nature, and let's not do that.
Right.
And Richard got a little group going, and they troll, and I just don't think that's the wave of the future. I think that's out there, and I've been known to be a glass half full kind of person, but I don't think that stuff is increasing in its influence in our conversations.
Yeah, and that's
and
great to hear.
There's a lot of critique about it, and a lot of people understand, the selfish gene is really a stupid idea, and it doesn't hold up at all, and so but we've had these fads in science throughout the history of inquiry. So let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, meanwhile, Andreas and I are leading the pack.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess
looking at it very differently, and I don't think that we need to really even spend a lot of time feeling bad about what some people think. Let's talk about what's cool about what's going on.
I with you completely on that, Ursula. And what I'd like to do is kind of turn to this kind of notion of purpose or teleology, which to me at least, and I explore this in the Web of Meaning a fair amount, is one of those key kind of shifts from that nothing but kind of mechanistic view, because we're told in science that there is no purpose in life. That in fact, things just happen, evolution happens, and the whole notion of teleology for many years, not completely now, I agree, but has been sort of rejected. You couldn't even seriously discuss that in life. And then here's Andreas's first law of desire, which I quote in the Weber meeting. I think it's fantastic, that everything that lives wants more of life. Organisms are beings whose own existence means something to them. And Andreas, I think that's so, to me, that's so profound. And do you want to just riff on that a little bit and tell us what that actually means and how you see the actual role of purpose in life itself?
Yeah, let me before just also give a little comment on Richard Dawkins, and also let me sympathize with your need to somehow distinguish from that streak in mainstream biology, because if we're not talking about let's say the avant-garde thinkers who lead the pack, but if we're talking about mainstream biological education, if we're talking about school education, if we're talking about science writing in media, we still have this, because there's always this huge delay of paradigm shifts. And I mean, I think we can say, I completely agree, Ursula, with that. The selfish gene is actually dead. And so it was so dominating, but it wasn't. It was actually less dominating in biology itself, but in the general culture,
right?
Which actually is, this is not better. It might even be worse, because then all these well-writing journalists are just only coming from this efficiency only corner and only functionalism, and we need a purpose in everything, and it needs to be formulated in economic terms. I remember that a year ago, I had the invitation to give a little talk about my work at a biological department in a German university, because I happened to be in that city, and the people who had invited me had also connections to those biologists, and they invited me, and I gave my little talk, and I felt awkward and more awkward, and then they were absolutely totally doubtful about everything I said. And then we had this discussion where all these economic terms popped up. They were only talking about investment and payoff in terms of evolution, like in terms of what behavior or what phenotype is better in terms of you invest something and you get something back. And I was thinking, wow, this science has become a sort of a strange sort of neoliberalism.
Yeah.
And even though great scientists are going elsewhere, the bulk is doing this, and the public is seeing this. And I think the fact that such a big audience is here today, this evening in Europe at least, that this noon in California, shows that there is this perception that somebody really needs to say aloud that it is different. Sorry, Jeremy, I actually, that was a full answer. It was even longer than a full answer. I didn't answer your question.
It's great.
But I really needed to do this because I absolutely agree with you that this is a problem. It's a problem, but it's more a problem of culture than a problem of how biology works.
Yeah. No, I hear. And, to turn to you, Ursula, it feels to me like, when you wrote the book, The Sacred Depths of Nature, that is your the way in which you have been shifting culture yourself, but moving it in this totally different way than the selfish gene sort of type of thing. I'd love to ask you, I'm curious about how you came to that phrase, religious naturalism, as you sort of work through it. And perhaps, for people who haven't actually read your book, you want to maybe give it like a definition of what you actually mean by this term religious naturalism, because it sure be wonderful if the number of people who've read The Selfish Gene was the same number of people who read your book, and all of a sudden we'd be seeing this culture shift taking place.
That would be great. So first of all, I don't use the term religious naturalism because that sounds like a philosophy. So I leave that to Andreas.
I see.
We talk about a religious naturalist orientation. Okay, so orientation is a buzzy word in our times. And so a naturalist basically takes nature to mind, so understands how nature works all the way down interrelationships, interdependence, the planetary matrix, the universe, what we call everybody's story, takes that story to mind. And then the religious part has to do with taking nature to heart. So it's having the natural world be something that is sacred, and that you therefore orient your life to preserving and cherishing and loving.
Yeah. You know, I love that. That makes so much sense. One thing I was always curious about was your choice of actually using this loaded word religious. I mean, because and I see in your book, I know you talk about the concept of God, you know, with a capital G, and explain this anthropomorphic concept. No, that's not going to work for me. It might work for other people. But you chose the word religious. And honestly, as I was writing The Web of Meaning, I kind of found myself avoiding that way. Even the word spiritual, I kept away from the title, and I went into it in so much depth. I actually came up with a systems definition of spiritual and spirit, which maybe we can even go there in a few minutes. But I'm curious, did you think long and hard before you used the word religion?
Oh, yeah, I knew it was loaded, but I mean, you know, you can do two things with a word. You can not use it because it's loaded, or you can try to think of a better way to use the word and hope that it becomes the way it's used. And it is a beautiful word. It means to ligate, to get together. Religious traditions have been in every culture that's ever been recorded. So it's certainly something that humans are into. And the notion is that in a religious orientation, one takes a story, this takes something to mind, and then the responses, the religious responses, I think of them as three kinds. One, excuse me, I call interpretive. So how do I interpret the story? What's its meaning? How do I fit in? What does it tell me about death? The second is spiritual. How does it make me feel? You know, awe, respect, humility. And the third is outward, moral.
Right.
Compassion. And that all three of those orientations have to do with being religious. And spiritual is one of them. But to be just spiritual isn't what we need right now. We also need moral. We need
yes, exactly.
And so I'm hoping that if we keep using it long enough, that those of us who are squeamish about religious can begin to figure out another way of dealing with it.
That's very interesting, actually. So basically, to you see sort of religious, the term is this larger term than spiritual, because it incorporates those other two dimensions too.
Exactly.
What about you, Andreas? Because I see in your books, I've noticed the more by its absence, the word, things like religious, spiritual, and I notice a lot of focus on things like concepts of quality and purpose, and this kind of what I see as a very spiritual concept, as I describe in The Web of Meaning, but the sense of identity, the very identity itself blurring with all of life. And I'm just kind of curious what is your take on those choices of how you describe that realization that arises from this deep understanding of biology?
Yeah, thank you. So I got another go at talking about purpose now, and I hope I would get this. So I think the nexus is between this talking about religion and talking about organisms as meaningful experiences from the inside is you can find in the word value, because value is an experience of helpful or not so helpful. And my formulation of organisms, which I'm bringing from the Paris school edition of the Santiago school. So this is really firmly grounded in my work with Francisco Varela, is the idea that we need to look at organisms at every organism, every cell, as a subject which builds itself from the surrounding world and experiences this process from the inside with a perspective of how well or how not so well this is done.
Mm-hmm.
So organisms are actually desiring to live, to flourish, and they realize this desire by incorporating stuff which is not themselves. And as
Mm-hmm.
this is something which can go right and can go wrong, there is value, there's feeling at the beginning of the organism. So that is the profound big shift in thinking. So organisms are their own work, and they are their own work because they are driven by this mystical desire of unfolding and connecting.
Mm-hmm.
And from this standpoint, there are no machines, there are no objects, but there are subjects. And
Mm-hmm.
subjects have feelings, and subjects have a standpoint, and subjects have desires. And you see, from if you accept this, the whole world changes. The whole world is different.
Yeah, I'm so with you on that. And you know, one way in which I explored quite deeply in my book, The Web of Meaning, is beginning with this problem of in physics, the second law of thermodynamics, right? With this entropy in the universe, which I think Einstein said is the one law which will never be overturned, no matter what physics ever uncovers. And then we come across life and autopoiesis, as Francisco Varela and Maturana came up with, autopoiesis as basically like islands of negative entropy or syntropy, in this horrendous reality of entropy in the universe. So, and from that, to me, that seems to be, that's where value began in life. But this leads to me to a fundamental, like a deep philosophical question that I would love to ask you both, is this kind of concept of really what is the ultimate foundation of value itself? And I ask that because sometimes I find myself getting conversations with people who see ultimately they see basically consciousness is all. And there's a theory that I feel, you know, it's coming from serious scientific basis as well as spiritual basis of consciousness really pervading all the universe, even things that are not life. There's this integrated information theory from Giulio Tononi, a great physicist. I'm sorry, a great neuroscientist who actually came up with this complex theory, which leads to this notion of essentially consciousness being all through life. But so I'm curious if either of you have a sense of what you see as the ultimate foundation of value. Is it life? Is it the universe? Is it consciousness? And this, I feel, if this is not just this abstract philosophical concept, because right now, for example, here in Silicon Valley, there's people exploring AI. And they're looking at this question. For some people, it's a given that at some point AI will become conscious, but it may not be alive. And so is the ultimate value that AI that may end up determining some sort of, you know, way of expanding consciousness throughout the universe of its own kind, or is the ultimate value life itself, even without humans as part of it? So I'd love to hear what, perhaps to turn to you, Ursula, first. Like, do you have a view on that?
Well, that was a big thing.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. On where, what is the ultimate? Do you see an ultimate source of value?
So
basically,
not an ultimate source of value. I think each organism is assessing its situation with the tools that it has, and it values things that are good for it, and it tries to protect itself from things that are bad for it. And one of the things that almost all creatures have now come into their repertoire is paying attention to the other critters in the environment, as well as the rest of the planetary matrix, and as well as each other, and forming social groups and so on. So what one values really depends on the kind of critter we're talking about. So a bacterium values just the same way as we do in terms of what's good and what isn't good, but it makes very different choices.
But so on that basis, if say I'm one of these people here in Silicon Valley, I might say, well, okay, I got you. And since we're human beings, it's right for us to only value what we as a human species value. So if it turns out that it's better to turn the rest of life into like a resource for our human flourishing, and if that's turns better for us, then isn't that okay for us to value that? there's no other there's no intrinsic value in life. It's just what I value. So how would you respond to somebody else?
I would tell that person that they needed to take a walk in the woods.
Right.
I mean, that's such a ridiculous point of view, and it's ridiculous. I mean, we need bacteria to fix nitrogen for us. I mean, it's all got to be here, and what humans think that they want is a really irrelevant matter. It's how the whole system works and how to keep it going.
Thank you, Ursula. What about you, Andreas? Do you have a view on this?
Oh, and by the way, Andreas, before you start, I just want to say that your version of I call what you're talking about a self, but with purpose and teleology, is spot on, and I agree 100%. So nobody's off on another tangent on that one.
Thank you, Ursula. Yeah, I love the question, Jeremy. I love these questions. This is just a beautiful, really big metaphysical question. The sort of questions they told me in the 90s at university in the philosophy department, we would never ask again because they were so stupid, and we are over that. And I love it. So thank you for this question. So what is the ultimate source of value? Okay, I'd say that that reality itself yearns to give life, because giving life is bliss, and reality itself yearns for this bliss. And reality itself is, as we know, full of bodies and things, but as we also know, it is full of experiences, and it is itself as a whole one huge experience. And or we could even say, I always try to be parsimonious. It is one huge desire to give life, but from the inside, not only as a factual occurring, but a huge, extremely beautiful desire to give life from the inside. So everyone might imagine how this feels, and this is, I'd say, my vision of the source of value. So you see, value is always it always has a direction. It has a vector. It's directed towards life, and because being alive means to generate life, and this is actually eudaimonia again. This is happiness, and the beautiful thing is that organisms, individuals, as manifestations of this desire, know what it is. We feel what it is because we manifest. So we have a direct access to this, and that's actually what it is about. And then now you see, if you follow me a little bit, now you see how far off our civilization is. And then you also see that our civilization cannot survive being so far off, because life will give life. And that's actually the danger for our civilization, that life will always give life. And everybody who gets in the way of this will run over. And humans, by the lead of the most powerful and most egomaniacs, most egoistic individuals are doing this. Okay, so that's an addendum. But I hope I gave you a metaphysical answer.
Love that so much. And yeah, I mean, just from myself, it feels to me like life itself is this kind of foundation. This is the miracle, really, that we have this kind of universe which we presume there is life. I think it seems really likely that other forms of self-organized autopoiesis have occurred elsewhere in this massive universe. But it's the fact that the universe set the conditions for this to happen, which is where we can be so grateful for that very fact that, as you write in your book, actually, just the very fact that we are here, that there is something rather than nothing. But the experience of life seems to me so fundamentally important. So I love that quote of I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live by forgetting his name, the 20th century humanitarian Albert Schweitzer. Just amazing. That to me is foundational. So thanks for that. I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure that I see tons of people have already put some questions and thoughts, reflections in the chat. But let me pause right now and give a moment for people to, if they want to actually join us and actually ask the question directly, just go to the Zoom, put your hand up there, and I see Jesse right there. In fact, I saw you already put a question in the chat. So great to have you join us, Jesse. Let's spotlight you, and other people feel free to just kind of join the line as we discuss the question Jesse raises. Hey, Jesse. We have to take you off mute, Jesse. You're still on mute.
Can you unmute yourself?
I unmuted once. Now
there you are. You're good.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. We got you.
Yeah. So I've been studying some of the things that science avoids studying for many years now, particularly the little transient developments that happen at the beginning and end of things, the growth processes that come out of nowhere, and there are spiritual qualities to all natural systems that as I can see, that there's so many completely unanswerable endpoints to the search for understanding them. How they emerge by growth from unobservable tiny design patterns of unknown kind and inspiration, breathing in of spirit of some kind that becomes a self-animating embodiment of a unique form and purpose in nature. And it's very mysterious. But and I'm hesitant. I want to engage with people's feelings, because I think that's important for the unfeeling people that are destroying the planet. But the question of religion, though, is that religion is almost as prone to abuse as social media. And wondering if there's anything to say about that.
About the abuse of the word
well,
religion,
the tension between, I guess, honest observation and mystical traps.
Mm-hmm. Ursula, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would say that in my vocabulary, religion means something that's organized and established with priests and buildings and tithes and an understanding of a particular paradigm. We're talking about a religious naturalist orientation, where each religious naturalist may very well come up with quite different spiritual priorities, very different interpretations of how the natural world works, and that what's important is taking it on and experiencing it and getting wet. So religion, I think, I never use the term except when I'm speaking about historical organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And perhaps let me just add from Jess's question there, a question I saw in the chat from, I'm not sure if it's Jean or John Hegland, talking about, which lives do we as humans need to encourage? For one example, how does the issue of reproductive choice fit into this conversation of our needs to encourage all life? Which, given what's been going on in the United States right now, seems like a relevant topic to explore. I mean, how do we take these kind of philosophers we're talking about and apply that in practice to something like that question? Either of you want to?
Yeah, well, a fetus in a womb or an embryo in a womb is not yet alive. It's still dependent on its mother so it's a part of that mother, and that mother can and should have the choice, since we have the understanding of how this all happens, to not let that entity be born. And we have very strict rules about when you can and cannot do an abortion. And for me, it's just an open and shut case. I mean, I've got 5 kids, so I'm certainly happy with reproducing. But I've also had an abortion, and it was a very important thing for me at the time. And we have to make these decisions.
Yeah, thank you for that. Really clear, such a clear and obvious answer. Thank you. Can we turn to Barbara? I see your hand is raised, Barbara. Welcome from England, Barbara.
It was Andreas that I wanted to just clarify firstly about his initial concept of how each living thing is driven by its interaction with the outside. Have I understood that correctly, what you were saying at the beginning?
Let me say it again. So we see that each living thing, each living subject is driven. Actually, it's not driven, he or she is not driven by the outside, but by something within the inside, which craves for more existence, and which also is able to lend a form to everything which comes into this inside. And now we have this strange dialectic. So it's actually a very simple shift, but then it's also a very dialectical shift, and that makes it complicated. So if you really look deeply down into the core of what is actually an organism, you see only outside. You see just stuff that has come from the outside. You see carbon which has been taken in, and you see all sorts of things, oxygen and water, which is somehow lying around or being incorporated in other beings, and but still all these things are arranged in a way that an insight is possible, an individuality is possible, and with this individuality, or maybe even at the beginning of this individuality, there's the perspective of a self. So we actually have a profoundly strange situation, and my teacher Francisco Varela called it an organism a meshwork of selfless cells, because if you look into it, you don't find anything. And this is why mainstream science could triumph and say, well, actually, if we looked into it and we didn't find a soul, like we looked in every chamber of the brain and there was no soul, so we conclude there is no soul. But what if what I now call soul, also the subjectivity, is not something you can find like you can find matter, but it is the idea of ongoing existence, or the desire, the yearning for ongoing existence. So you see, if you take it from this side, okay, sorry, yeah, go, please.
Well, this brings me to my problem, because it was when you were talking about value where I was worried of the way that you defined the value, because you seem to not encapsulate the interdependence that goes on when you define the value. And what the other thing that you didn't address was the very real possibility of extinction, especially extinction of all of life on Earth, which is the trajectory that we're on at the moment. And that worried me, because you didn't seem to build that into the value side of things.
Yeah, I mean, these are two very different points, and I can glean where you might be at when you say this, but maybe not.
Well,
and let me talk again about what I call value, because it's not value it is related to our values. It is very much related to our values, but I start from what is important for the perspective of somebody who desires to be and needs to be on the always escaping little tiny bits of the surrounding outside. So I'm really starting on a very, very simple level to talk about values, because I want to show that values are not related to social exchange in a human-only environment, but they are part of the very first experience of life. Life can't be without values, because it can go wrong. It can just stop. And I mean, that's when you say, okay, there's extinction, but extinction is, I think, on a different category of process of what can happen. It is actually a bold move to say, okay, so if an organism is actually the desire to create itself, and we accept that, so we have the birth of a self. An experiential self, a concern, who desires to do something or to be something, and then we can say, okay, so from this perspective, there are different outcomes possible, and these outcomes have different values for the organism, and they might not think about values. But they react in the way that you can see these values. So you can see them even if you do something to your bacterial cultures. So if you put something into it which they don't like, they swim away. So you have something visible. And so your bodies, which are the way organisms appear, are visibly showing these values they encounter, and they are at the same time interiorly showing these values, and that's our experience. So we have an inside and an outside of the same thing. And to me, that's so important to show that organisms always have this inside. They always have an experiential insight, and it is about something. But we're not yet arrived at that what human civilization calls values or morals or ethics. That's a very derivative layer. That's very much higher above.
Interesting. I could have put it much more simply. If I express a wish to commit suicide in order to help the situation that we're in, that puts the whole concept of what you're saying as value on its end, because my awareness of the situation that we're in is so extreme that I want to finish my own life. So how does that fit in with your concept of value?
Yeah, it's what is very important now is to realize that you're making a huge step from a very simple description, a very, very basic description of life, to a very complex situation. And it's important to see that by doing this step, you are adding layers of newly shared values, which have to do with the fact that living beings like you are made of incredibly many other tiny living beings, and that you are also connected to others outside of yourself. So talking about this, we first need to talk about, and that's a necessary next step, but we need to do this. We need to talk about how and I actually think you mentioned that in the first question you asked. We need to see how this how the subject, which is concerned about itself, is only possible through the presence of other subjects who are concerned about themselves, because he needs them or she needs them in order to exist in many respects, in order to exist through incorporating them, which we call eating or breathing, but also through relating to them in different ways. So the next step is to say, okay, we have this precarious subjective existence, which turns outside into inside. And then we have to see that this outside becomes of primordial importance. Mm-hmm. So this in this next step, we see that, okay, we have built this sort of little model subject in order to show that life is interiority. But then we have to see that every subject is also its opposite. It's its counterpart. Mm. Every subject is intersubjectivity. So then we are in another paradoxical field where we say that life is about desiring to exist, but this desiring to exist can only be done together and in opposition to others. So we are in a sort of situation where desire needs to be negotiated, and this can also go wrong. Yeah. This can also go wrong.
Can we talk about
should we just come to a closure on this, because we have all these other questions waiting to be asked? And like, if I can just add one thing to this overall question, which is so profound, is to me what Andreas's work helps so much with relates to this notion of animate intelligence or animate consciousness, that basically through our realization that we are life, connected with life, to me that can lead to this clear commitment from us as human beings to work for life and to try to turn our civilization around. So, I mean, that's where I see Andreas's work having such a big impact on being life affirming in our current civilization. But if we can go to Mark, I see you've had your hand up and turn to watch.
Right.
Yeah, you're great. We can hear you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Andreas and Catherine. I'm very much picking up on what you're just saying there, Jeremy, and you've heard me say this before in other forums, I think. But that sense of this energy of values, which informs everything as I'm understanding, and is shaping the concerns of each part, and therefore shaping and driving and informing their activities in this interactive meshwork, which seems to me like a common flow of kind of common sentience, which all parts of life draw from at whatever capacity they exist and able to do that. And it seems to me that we really, I'm interested in your thoughts on whether we need some more language around this. As I've said in this forum before, it's amazing to me as a psychotherapist that people will gather to talk, in Scotland or wherever, to talk about the biosphere and the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, the cryosphere. Mm-hmm. No one is talking about the psychosphere. And it's a little different to noosphere, which kind of, as I understand it, de Chardin sort of saw us aspiring towards. Whereas to my mind, the psychosphere is actually aspiring towards us and asking us to read the feedback, to see how it measures and feels in our bodies, which is where psychology comes in, and not to mistake feedback as eco-anxiety or climate trauma and pathologize it, because that thinking, if we were learning to ride a bicycle, would have us believe that gravity was a personal failing. So I'm wondering whether a word like psychosphere is something that could usefully be added to the equation and thereby liberate our great understanding, or people who have great understanding of trauma, of attachment theory, and so on, to be part of that conversation. Because as a psychotherapist, I fear until that happens, we aren't going to see it as something germane to our individual sense of who we are.
Interesting. Wow, great thoughts, Mark. Thank you. Ursula, I don't know if you have anything.
Well, I would only say that what, for me, there isn't. Psychosphere makes it sound like we're just talking about human psyches. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, all right. Then for me, all life is aware. I don't know any life form that isn't aware of its circumstances. It wouldn't keep going. And so for me, what we're talking about is the biosphere. It's all organisms have awareness, have value systems, and so and I think we're talking about that quite a bit, actually. I don't understand your thinking that we don't talk about the awareness
I've never seen a psychologist part of any of those panels.
What about Gaia? I mean, you know, and reverence to James Lovelock, who has, as most people know, probably he passed yesterday at age 103, and one of the great minds of this century. And in a way, maybe that's what you're getting at, Mark, it feels like, is this recognition that there is this greater, organism, quote unquote, because all scientific controversy about whether Gaia itself is an organism, but this process, this system-wide connectivity, that when we're feeling that, rather than being it pathologized as eco-grief, it's like we are Gaia, and feeling the actual devastation that is taking place to its complexity, to its richness from the civilization. So yeah, great exploration. Thank you for that, Mark. And let's move to Mansoor, whose hand is up.
Hello, thank you. I was wondering that there is a deep simplicity that we are not paying attention to it because of domination of linear mind and linear thinking that we created through the self-conscious process that we went through. What I see as an observant, we have a self-organizing universe and self-organized system that we can observe it in our body that's capable of doing the most complex thing with minimum effort, like talking. While I'm saying one word and you are listening to it, is 4 million neurons that cell between you and I are synchronizing without any effort to just take one word from me to my mind to your mind. And at the same time, it's regulating my body as far as the temperature, as far as the oxygen level, as far as all those enzymes and everything too. Did that deep simplicity come from self-organizing system that we see it in our body, we see it in the other animals, in a plant or Earth, and the whole solar system and all of that. And we are now able to even crack that where is this how this self-organizing process happens, which is a nonlinear networks. Since it's mathematical, you can, and doesn't deal with any substance, you can find the basic properties and behaviors of the self-organizing process, and how right now that we are going through this chaos and uncertainty and unsustainability of linear model, approximate model that we created through our self-conscious process, we are emerging and we have enough information. We consume the Earth's resources, but convert it to information and technology that is allowing us to realize how this self-organizing process is, and what are the and what is the difference between this nonlinear system and the linear approximate model that we created through our self-conscious process. It seems to me the Earth as a bigger living system, self-organized, wanted to be self-aware, choose human being to gain that knowledge, and it's already been achieved. And all we need to do is just synchronize back again ourselves with that self-organizing process, which is nonlinear network, and providing it too. So I have actually, Jeremy, I sent you an email about that because Papa told me about you and your thinking the same way.
Right, exactly.
I was hoping that we had a chance somehow to have a conversation and look at that. But anyway, that deep simplicity is the issue, and the linear mind, when it's trying to explain this nonlinear system, is becoming unsustainable. It's becoming more confused. Exactly the way that we started to explain the quantum mechanics with the linear thinking, that it was making more confusion for the people rather than understanding it, because these are nonlinear. And that nonlinear is just an approximate model that we created through our self-conscious process. So
yeah, Andreas or Ursula, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think I don't have any thoughts. What I understood was a particular perspective on how things work, and I think it was an interesting perspective to hear about, but I don't have any comments.
Yeah, and Andreas, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I took it more as a comment and then as a question, but I would identify the idea of the most simple living units as creating themselves as a circular version of something which had been a linear version before, when a cell was a programmed machine, and things, there are very different outcomes if you apply circular thinking, or if you find circular thinking in the world. So I basically agree that's a crucial change, and yeah.
Okay, great, thank you, and thank you for sharing your perspective, Mansoor.
Thank you.
And yeah, and over to Tom.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate your question in terms of what is value, because I see that as it's necessary for us to answer that in much broader ways than we ever have before. Because value, I think, is superficially defined as, well, if we're all one and we're all interdependent and all separate and all those are true, then everything has value and has value to each other. And the way to answer the value question is working, I think, from the opposite end of how it all began. And how it all began was apparently from spirit, universal intelligence, bursting forth with two forms of evolution, and that is physical evolution with the 4 physical forces, and then conscious evolution, which we're in now. And that was the essential values that allowed the universe to be created. And once the universe was created, those values of conscious and physical evolution eventually created a planet that then created life on that planet, that then created us as a species, and gave us as a historic feature the ancestors that gave us personally our lives. And so we're like at the peak of a mountain. And to value this mountain, we have to value all these layers that are life support systems that give us the ability to be conscious and keep evolving here. And if we want to evolve in ways that are healthy and sustainable, we got to evolve not just for ourselves, not just for our special interest groups. We have to evolve for the whole process.
So it sounds like your suggestion, Tom, is we've got to expand that identity basically to the whole of the universe, essentially, as to really move in to include everything, basically, is what I sense.
Yes.
And what do you
value those not as proportionally as we do, where we value ourselves first and our groups for second,
right?
But the opposite way, that we've got to respect how evolution works and stay within the boundaries of it.
Well, you know, it's a great question. Should there be a prioritization of values and I've seen that there's a couple of questions that have come through about morals and question morality. Like there was a question about, are morals not relative to culture? You know, how do we end up with a civilization that had a different set of values that is so seemingly destructive? So I love to hear from Ursula and Andreas. What do you sense of because we are called to prioritize values all the time. So it's not just a matter of what's an ultimate value, but how do we prioritize them?
Ursula, would you be okay if I just say just a little thing to somehow shed light on my, let's say, original idea of this, because I realize that in our talk here in this round, we get very quickly from my use of the world, which is about how a living being experiences its self-realization. We get to the big human questions and value with the big V on the beginning, and then we're in let's say tendentially chaotic terrain for long discussions. But to me it's very important. I only wanted to show one thing. I wanted to show that life at its beginning is not neutral dump and without any experience. That's to me, this is the important takeaway from that. And when I'm talking about values here, it is about these values are absolutely embodied in experience, and these are the values we feel when we feel something like a tender touch or a painful sting. So something which is very down to earth and embodied. And to me, it's important to include every being into this feeling realm, and it's also important to base any discussion about values which arise in our human interactions on this inclusive experience of values. But this discussion needs to tread very carefully and proceed very slowly, in order not to just to open the door and let in the let's say the usual cultural dead ends of people having different values and then hitting on one another, beating on one another.
Right.
But to me, the very important thing is to say, okay, so we actually the world is full of the experience of value, which is very similar to our own experience of value. And now that we need to make something of this, because this is totally different from the world as a dead, mute thing.
And
Ursula?
yeah, thank you, Andrea. And Ursula, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not a philosopher, so I'm going to quote a philosopher friend, Loyal Rue, who is responding to the idea that you can't get facts from values from facts, that nature doesn't come prepackaged with moral recommendations. And this was another question that you said was coming up about how do we get moral.
Right.
And here's what he wrote. Religious naturalists treat the integrity of natural systems as an absolute value, implied by the principle that any vision of the good presupposes life, and that life presupposes the integrity of natural systems. Nature is the sacred object of humanity's ultimate concern. Nature is the ultimate ground of natural facts, and ecocentric values are therefore justified by the claim that nature is sacred.
Such clarity. Ursula, thank you for bringing Loyal into this conversation. What a great response. It seems so clear to me. Thanks. So let's turn to Elizabeth. Hey there, Elizabeth. You're in Hawaii?
Yes, I am.
From Hawaii. Great to see you.
Thank you, Jeremy, for the privilege of bringing us into direct conversation with you, Ursula, and with you, Andreas. I feel very privileged right now. And everything that everyone says raises 10 new questions in my mind. But I agree with you, Andreas, that when you look just from the individual perspective, the basic value is the impulse to go on living. And as you just acknowledged, there is no such thing as an individual by itself. We can talk about rabbits, and we focused on individuals through the Darwinian model, but we have to look at not rabbits in habitats, but rabbitats, as I like to say. that you have to look at the context, and so the next big value that comes in, I think, after the individual is what is the value, the relationship value to the rest of what's going on, since there's no such thing as an individual by itself. It can't happen. So we have to look at that relationship. And it seems to me that the wonderful thing about evolution biology now is that it's finally recognized the huge importance of cooperation. And that as soon as you move beyond the individual level, you see that cooperatives are selected on the basis of how internally cooperative they are. And I just jumped off another webinar that was talking about Rudolf Steiner, talking about whether humans are capable of cooperation and all of these questions, where the role of governance would have to be how to get the players in an economy to cooperate, and that the role of governance would include conflict resolution, and that would be a basis for a new society, was that because as long as you have individuals, you have this opportunity for the competition to get beyond the cooperation. And I'm sorry that we got away from your question, Jeremy, of artificial intelligence, because I've been thinking so much about Jim Lovelock in the past 24 hours.
Right.
Near the end of his life, he was both very interested in the possibility of what the word transhumanism has been taken over by people in that. So I'd like to get back to that. And basically it's about, are we humans capable of cooperation at the global level? We've proved it in families, we've proved it in communities. Indigenous people proved it in up to the Alliance of Six Nations Haudenosaunee, who had the only democracy I know of. But I'd like to hear from Ursula and Andreas, and are we capable of cooperation at the global level?
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
If we get a good global religion.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what religions have always done, is to get the tribe or the group or whatever to cooperate. Loyal Rue says that they're about educating the social emotions. All right. And if we were, to someday have a global religious orientation that was ecocentric and was determined to figure out ways that human cultures and the rest of nature and its beings could somehow cohabit the planet, we'd be onto something.
Yeah.
That's a dream, obviously, but like they say in South Pacific, you got to have a dream. How are you going to have a dream come true? So, and that's what I see as DTN all about as well, having a dream.
Yeah. Thank you. What are your thoughts, Andreas, on that?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. There were there were a lot of questions actually with many points, and you pointed to I start with that other paradox you picked when you said, okay, so when we come from individuals to their interaction, which is an ecosystem, so how can we look at this? And the interesting thing is that what an ecosystem strives for is to be alive as well. So there we have the same idea of desiring aliveness, but then now it is on an ecosystem level. So that would be something good for an ecosystem, to be as alive as possible. But then we also see that the individuals in these ecosystems cannot maintain their individual existence because they need to be eaten in ecosystems. So we run into another profound paradox. And I wanted to highlight this because it's very important, but we still have the desire for aliveness, or nowadays I say more the desire to generate life at the core. So we this is still a principle which this goes with us through the various levels, and this is actually something which again we can share as humans, and we know that we know this from empirical psychological research. We know that humans feel very much alive when they cooperate. So actually humans are a very cooperative species, and we feel good when we do this. When we cooperate, truly cooperate, that means on a fair level. And not only with humans. So this is another one. We feel good when we cooperate with other living beings in creating aliveness. So that's how we are made. And now when you ask, can humans cooperate on a global scale? I think we shouldn't ask, can humans do that? Because humans can do that. We should ask, can humans who are formed or deformed by our current mainstream culture do this? And then we say we see, well, they really have some difficulties. And what I want to highlight is that we cannot state something about a human character if we confuse it with the cultural character. So we need to see that humans are ecologically apt, and they are able to generate cultures which create cooperation with every species in the ecosystem, because that's how humans came about in the ecosystem. But our current culture, which unfortunately dominates everyone on the planet, destroys this and destroys cooperation. So the problem is the culture, and not faults in humans or faults in nature. The problem is this culture.
Exactly.
And how to get rid of that?
Thank you, Andreas.
Don't ask me.
Yeah, and I'm seeing at the time right now that it's 15 minutes past the hour, and so have to call a close on this. And I do see Martin Lampert, I see your hand's been up, and my apologies, we didn't get to you. And what I'd like to ask you to do is, I'm going to put this video up on the network probably by tomorrow, hopefully. And if I could ask you if you could put your question there in the comments, we'll have a chance for Andreas or Ursula or whoever you wanted to respond to what you share. So my apologies for that. And I do feel this is a great place to close that question from Elizabeth, that and the answers you gave, that this basically is our core humanity, is to cooperate, which is really what we need in that shifting paradigm, to recognize our connection with life and what we are as human beings as really our only hope to turn things around. And perhaps on that subject right now, just before we close, just wanted to announce actually that next Tuesday, the topic of a monthly live network meeting that for those of you who are new to the network, each month we get together as a community around a specific theme. And next Tuesday, it's going to be held at the same time as this, whatever time it is, your time zone, 1 p.m. Pacific, Tuesday, August 2nd. The theme will be eco-governance, a perfect follow-on, almost like a response to Elizabeth's final question, a unifying framework for an innovative and natural way of organizing ourselves as a species. And this eco-governance framework has been developed by two lifetime activists, Shelley Ostroff and Jan Golding, who have created a website together called Codes for a Healthy Earth that some of us came across and discussed on the network here last month. And when I saw this website, I was stunned by its sophistication and depth and alignment with our values here at the DTN. And next Tuesday, Shelley and Jan will be taking us through their vision and its implementation. So it feels like a perfect follow-on to this conversation today. And they'll have an invitation for DTN members to take part in helping launch that implementation. And we'll be having breakout groups next Tuesday and a full-on discussion. So don't miss it, and see you then. And just wanted to give a big heartfelt thanks to you, Ursula and Andreas. It's been just amazing, so profound to hear your perspectives that are on one hand so aligned and so unique at the same time, to help us all to make sense of things. And thank you to all who contributed with their reflections and questions. Thanks very much, and hope to see you all next Tuesday. Take care.
Thanks to you all. Thanks, Ursula, Jeremy.